Chapter 28. Jake was sitting on Graham's stoop where he'd watched the sun rise, the sky lightening from black to charcoal to gray. His ass and feet were numb, which was a nice distraction from the shredded, pulpy mess of his heart. He wasn't brave enough to face Chloe, to tell her Grams was dead, that she'd died on his watch. Because it was his watch. With their parents overseas, it was his duty to protect his family, and he'd failed. Mackenzie didn't get it. She'd never had a family. She didn't understand the overwhelming need to protect what you loved. And now Grams. His throat swallowed convulsively, bile threatening. Why hadn't he gone to see Grams as soon as he'd returned from Chicago? He knew the answer, of course. Mackenzie. He'd been so beguiled by their fledgling love, he'd neglected his responsibility. Resentment began a low burn in his belly. He'd forfeited his grandmother for a relationship that was now nothing but ash. In the early dawn hours, he'd cried for the loss of Grams, but now he steeled himself. Now he needed to face his sister, to be there for her through this senseless tragedy. He knew there was a manhunt for Jeffries, but he honestly didn't give a damn. The fury of his grandmother's murder was directed at himself. Jeffries may have pulled the trigger, but he was but an arm on the beast. The beast Townsend had created. Disillusionment threatened to swamp his resolve. He'd always prided himself on being on the good side. He didn't believe in shades of gray. But who was he kidding? Townsend wasn't gray, he was black, and Jake had been following him willfully. Jake! Chloe and Rachel careened around the corner, red-faced and out of breath. He stood, feet stinging with pins and needles. They knew. Chloe, I'm so sorry. What? She looked at him with confusion, panting. Grams. Oh. Her face fell, tears welling. It's not that, Rachel said. It's Mac. Townsend has had her arrested. He stared at her dumbly, not comprehending. Jake, we have to get to town hall. Rachel clutched his arm, her nails digging through his jacket sleeve. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about Grams. I know. Look, we can't think about that now. We have to get Mackenzie back. The streets were quiet as they approached town hall, and once they entered, Jake understood why. Every remaining resident of the town was here. Townsend had the stage, and Jake had to concentrate to hear him over his own labored breathing and the throb of his gunshot wound. The girls had their hands on their knees beside him, catching their breath. In this new world, we have to make unsavory compromises. Townsend was declaring from his position at the front of the crowd. We are not making allies of the men at our gates, but to satiate them, to protect our town from their invasion, we will bargain with them. These traitors will be traded for the very thing their dissent was threatening, the stability and safety of our town. Jake's knees buckled when he saw Mackenzie, Caroline, and Maggie dragged onto the podium, bound and gagged. Galvanized, he pushed at the backs of those in front of him, struggling to move through the crowd, intent on reaching Mackenzie. Hold up there, Jake. Where do you think you're going? A quiet voice said in his ear. Trent and Gavin had flanked him, halting his movement. We can't let this happen, you know that? Jake gasped. The only thing we know is that Townsend asked us to restrain you until the formalities are complete, said Trent. So move on back with us and let the boss do what needs to be done. You can't do this, Jake screamed as Trent and Gavin hauled him to the recesses of the hall. Several heads turned his way, but no one spoke up. You can't barter with human lives. You don't get it, do you? Trent said, conversationally. These people are scared shitless. They'll willingly trade someone else, so long as it's not them. Townsend is doing this for the greater good, Gavin added. Were you ever on Maggie's side? Jake said, holding his wounded side. It felt like a hot poker was stabbing him mercilessly. We're on the surviving side, Jake, which is where you should be. Hold up! Rachel's strident voice reached him, and he jerked his head toward the front. Why are you doing this? There has to be another way. What about whiskey? That was James, who stood beside Rachel. Offer them whiskey in return for leaving us alone. I'm not giving these degenerates our whiskey. Townsend laughed. You can't give them our people, Chloe screamed. She turned to those around her. If you let this happen, you're all complicit in what happens to them. As he struggled against Trent and Gavin, Jake could see the crowd murmuring. The rapt attention they'd focused on Townsend was dissipating. "This is what dissension looks like," Townsend bellowed. "I won't let our community be divided. We stand united. And unless you want that motorcycle gang to invade our town, this is what's happening." Mackenzie, Caroline, and Maggie were dragged to an offstage exit, thrashing and yelling against their makeshift gags. Jake saw red. His elbow snapped upward, slamming into the side of Gavin's face, who stumbled backward. Gasping through his own pain, Jake spun to face Trent. Trent dropped his hold on Jake and raised his pistol. The loud, reverberating boom of a gunshot had them freezing. Donnie, Maggie's son, stood on the top step of the stage, a bloom of red spreading across his chest before he fell. The crowd at the front of the hall began screaming, pushing back into those behind them until a wall of people surged toward where Jake stood. "Stop!" Trent shouted. "Back up!" He fired his AR-15 into the ceiling, which only added to the chaos. Using their distraction, Jake ran for the back door. Gavin attempted to stop him, but Jake slammed his fist into Gavin's face, noting with satisfaction the crunch of nasal cartilage. He didn't have a plan. He just knew he needed to get to the bridge before they handed Mackenzie over to the gang. Sprinting through the foyer, he burst outside, swinging left and then right. "Jake!" It was Jim, waving frantically at him from the street corner. "I have a truck." Jake heaved himself into the passenger side as Jim gunned the engine. "Jesse knows where Chloe stashed the weapons they found. We're meeting him at her place," Jim said. "We don't have time. We need to get to the bridge," Jake screamed. Sweat streamed into his eyes, and he swiped at the sting of it. "We can't do anything without weapons," Jim replied grimly. "Hang on." He mounted the curb and drove the vehicle through a front yard and down a side lane, leaving toppled trash cans in their wake. Jesse was waiting, laden down with several rifles. "Do they have ammo?" Jim called as Jesse slid into the back seat. "In the backpack," Jesse confirmed. "Go. Go." Every molecule in Jake strained to reach Mackenzie. He was white-knuckled, desperate. The truck roared as Jim punched through the gears, single-minded in his focus. Jesse leaned forward between the front seats, passing Jake a rifle. "Is it loaded?" "Yes." Good. Jake wouldn't hesitate to shoot to kill, again. They were too late. Jake canvassed the area around the bridge frantically, but there was no sign of the women. Buddy, shaken, was standing guard at the blockade, unable to take his eyes off the road leading out of town. Quinn had his back to them, and it was only when Jake vaulted from the vehicle and ran to him, he realized Kat was cradled against Quinn's front, sobbing uncontrollably. "What happened? Where did they go?" Jake cried, grabbing Quinn's shoulder. Jesse and Jim flanked him, guns raised as they searched the horizon. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," Quinn muttered, not meeting his gaze. There were too many of them. They were all on bikes, except for 3 in a van. That's what they used to take the women. Kat and I came straight here, thinking we could ambush the gang or get intel. I don't know, really. But Jesus, Jake. There were 20 of them, fully armed. They were their own army. "How long ago did they leave?" Jim demanded, already swinging around and heading back to the truck. 5 minutes, maybe, Buddy said, and then, ashen-faced, fell to his knees, retching into the dirt. "Sorry. I'm sorry." He wiped his mouth on his sleeve. "They shouldn't have done that. Townsend, he shouldn't have done that." "Where were they going? Back to Dutton?" Jesse asked. "Get in the truck," Jim growled. "We don't have time to stand around." "We need to know where they're going," Jake countered. "Quinn, did they say anything that would help us?" "Prestige Plaza," Kat hiccuped. "The gang are based at the Prestige Plaza in Dutton." She tugged at Quinn's hand. "Come on, let's go." "Not a chance, kitten," Quinn said. "You're not going anywhere." He caught Kat about her waist, holding her back. "You need a plan, Jake. You can't take them on without one." Jake knew he was right, but it didn't matter. Plan or no plan, they needed to get the women back. Fast. Who knew what was happening to them right now? Terror grappled, threatening to obliterate rational thought. If anything happened to Mackenzie, who was he kidding? It had happened. Was happening. And he needed to get to her. "Quinn, take Kat home," he instructed. "No, man. I'm coming with you. No, you're not. You need to take Kat and find Chloe and Rachel. Protect them. Jake knew Quinn was torn, and honestly, he needed Quinn's help to get the women back. But Jake also needed to know that someone was looking out for Chloe, Kat, and Rachel. He'd lost faith in Townsend and trust in Sanford. Resolutely, he nodded at Quinn. Look after them. I will. Get in the fucking truck, Jim yelled, already behind the wheel and revving the engine. Jake and Jesse ran, sliding into their seats as the truck was already moving. Wait, I want to come, Buddy yelled. You sure? Jake called out the window. We won't be welcome back in Sanford, you know that, right? Buddy paused and then nodded, climbing in beside Jesse. Let's go.